righty. Welcome to the fourth webinar in the Oregon Youth in Focus series. I am Catherine Plog Martinez from Knowledge to Power Catalyst. I will be your host and facilitator today. We are very excited to have many of you back with us, some of you joining us for the first time. I was having fun seeing all the different states represented in the chat. Shout out to the folks from NMSU. I grew up the daughter of an NMSU professor, so it was fun to see NMSU in the chat. Hadn't seen that one before. We are, as always, going to have a really exciting conversation today. We have a great lineup of panelists who are with us. It's going to be a jam-packed hour. Um, just a reminder, our first few webinars focused on readiness and thriving. We dug in on what it looks like to really connect across learning ecosystems. In our last webinar, we focused in on adolescence, thinking about that time period from 10 to 25. And today we're really thinking about mental well-being, about what it takes to support young people and communities in being mentally well. And I am so excited to first be joined by Dr. William Massey. Dr. Massey is an associate professor in the College of Health at Oregon State University and the director of the Youth and Young Adult Research Center at the Hallie Ford Center for Children and Families. And I'm going to bring him on screen with us right now. And I will hand it over to Dr. Massey to kick us off with some of his research on sports and play and mental health.
Awesome. Thanks, Catherine. Welcome, everyone. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. We'll talk a bit about some data around play and sport and mental health, and we'll kind of span developmentally, essentially early elementary through late adolescent. Often when we think of youth and mental health and mental well-being, it's one of the things that is really pertinent for me is helping kids be kids in tough times. And so when we think about play and sport and just their ability to, be themselves and have that creative expression, sometimes we can just push play and sport off to the side as something not important when we're going through hard times. And I think one of the things we can do is highlight the importance of it for child and youth development as well as youth well-being. Catherine, can you just give me a thumbs up if the screen is shared? Perfect. Okay. So we're going to talk some data today and some of the work that I've conducted over the last decade or so on youth play and sport and how it relates to well-being. The title here, we already know it's a good thing, is actually a quote from a parent of a potential research participant who called me late in my office one night, I think probably 7 o'clock on the West Coast, 9 o'clock Central Time, where he was calling from, to tell me that I was wasting my time studying school recess because everybody already knows that kids love recess and we don't need to spend any time studying it. And so I think at the core of a lot of my work is this idea of unpacking the false universalisms that like play is good or that sport is good or that sport is bad and looking at the nuance behind it. So if we start with recess, one of the things we see in the research is that about 2000, the public health sphere took over recess as an opportune time for physical activity. And recess became a good thing because kids were physically active at recess. And one of the very first studies we did on recess, we looked at accelerometry and we measured how active kids were, but we also did observations out on the playground. And one of the things that we noticed was recesses where there were large fights and like big multi-kid fist fights were actually the ones that were the most active. And so if we were just sitting in the lab looking at moderate to vigorous physical activity, we would have deemed recess to be really high quality, really great, because when kids fight and chase each other and tackle each other and punch and kick each other, well, they're actually accumulating a lot of physical activity. But if we think of holistically and holistic development, like maybe that's not the physical activity that we are searching for. And so there's been a lot of benefits of recess shown, including self-regulation, academic achievement, cognitive development, social and emotional development, cultivating a sense of resilience, and of course, physical activity. We have to counter that with other outcomes and research that have shown children, like recess is the number one place where children are subjected to bullying, fights, and exclusion during the school day. Um, that social factors influence resources and engagement. And one of the things we see is that there are social hierarchies, and some kids, get more access than others. And if you're an athletic older boy, you tend to take up most of the space, and you push everybody else to the margins of the playground and the margins of the equipment. Um, Principals report that it's the most challenging time of the day in terms of behavior. And so, yes, there are all of these good things. There are also some things that maybe are less ideal. And then how do we dance with that a little bit to understand what we can do to just better support our young people? So, the argument that I am going to make today is that adults are a key contributor to here recess quality, but when we get to sport quality as well. And one of the things that is important is hearing from the kids first. And so a while back, we did a study, it was a systematic review where we looked at every paper published on recess that included some level of child voice, where they actually talked to kids. And we synthesized all of those findings. And they actually mirror a lot of the research we do when we talk to kids, and that the challenges are poor space, not enough equipment, lack of consideration for children's voice, that it's too short, we need more time. That, as I mentioned in the previous slide, bullying, social hierarchies, and gender dynamics are problems, and that teacher support and engagement are positives at recess. They want adults to be involved, but essentially to stop with the rules. And so, one of the dichotomies that we see over and over is this idea that adults view their role as keeping children physically safe from injury. And they think that kids should have to figure out the social dynamic stuff themselves. Kids would like teachers to let them get hurt more. Like, let us take risks, let us climb trees, let us jump off of things. If we get hurt, that's on us. But help us with the social stuff, because that's really hard and we don't know how to do it. We actually run a program here on campus where we do physical activity programming for youth who are unhoused. And even this past week, teenagers in our end of the night debrief said, like, hey, can you guys just like step up a little bit more and reinforce positive social norms in like the sport games that we play, because like we noticed it slipping. And so oftentimes as adults, we see those things backwards as it relates to how kids see them. In another study we did observations of over 100 recesses all across the country, took field notes, and we looked at our field notes over the course of a year to see what was going on the playground. At the center of it were the adults. And so we think of recess as children's time, and it should be, but adults control the design of playgrounds, the maintenance of playgrounds, the availability of equipment, the rules that are out there, when you can go out there. And so to say that we just have to eliminate thinking about the adults, I think is really doing a disservice to the children who are out there. And when we saw inadequacies and inequities at recess, we could point to some level of adult control that was making it harder for children, or a lack of adult presence and engagement that was lead or giving an opportunity for negative social behavior to kind of fill that vacuum, fights, bullying, hierarchies. And so when we see adults present and engaged, which is different from supervisory and controlling, that's where we saw the best outcomes for children. If we build on that narrative a little bit, going to present just some different outcomes from a few different studies, but just building the case that adults are important. In one study, we saw that adult engagement and behavior helped moderate the relationship between gender and physical activity. So essentially, when we have present and engaged adults, it changes the dynamic, particularly for girls. We know fourth and fifth grade girls are not very active. One way to get them more active and to balance the playing field is through adult engagement. In another one where we did observations of over 8,000 kids on the playground, and we looked at what they were doing and how they were playing. The number one predictor for engagement of both girls and boys was adult engagement on the playground. So essentially, when adults were engaged playing with kids, that's what predicted a higher level of engagement for kids. And then in another study, we looked at the classroom behavior of over 300 kids as measured by teacher report. And we also did observations on the playground. So 25 schools, I think 5 different areas of the country. We were in Oregon, Southern Texas, Colorado, Wisconsin, and I want to say Massachusetts, but forgive me if somebody looks at the paper and I'm wrong. um, and recess quality predicted adaptive classroom behavior, executive functioning problems, resilience, and emotional self control. Recess time was not a predictor of those outcomes. And so, one of those things where it's not just about like quantity of time we're giving kids to play, but also the environment and the quality at which we're looking at that. In some more recent studies um, we did a pretty big study across a year where we measured at 4 time points in 9 different elementary schools. And one of the things we looked at was belongingness and victimization on the playground. And, oftentimes in recess work, it can be a little bit challenging in that a lot of kids do really like recess, and it's hard to see outcomes at the aggregate because like the kids who are having a great time kind of like wash out the results for everybody else. But when we actually isolated those who felt really low belonging and really high victimization at the beginning of the year, and then we looked at schools that put an intentional adult on the playground to facilitate a higher level of belonging and inclusiveness. We saw that they were the best responders on those outcomes. And so in that same study, we saw that 47.7% of students reported feeling unwelcome or uncomfortable at recess at time 1. That went down to about close to 35% at time 4. And the thing that predicted that change was a level of a perception of adult support on the playground. So when students reported didn't report a positive change in adult support, they had higher odds of feeling unwelcome over time in that analysis. So that's a little bit of play and recess. I'm going to shift a little bit to sport as well. And I think what you'll see is a very similar theme and pattern here in terms of the importance of adults and adults shaping the environment, but we'll couch it in a little bit more of an adolescent context. And so this question, is there a relationship between sport participation and mental health, is one that's been popping up in the literature. Even if when we think of youth mental health, like we will never be able to meet the demand of children's mental health and emotional well-being needs through one-on-one counseling or therapy. We have to do it through building communities that will support the development and resilience of those youth and give them access to those resources. You could make an argument that sport could be an avenue through which you could do that. Molly Easterling and her colleagues published a study in 2019, pretty big study, almost 10,000 people, that showed that individuals with adverse childhood experiences, if they participated in team sports, they had significantly better mental health outcomes as adults. And so obviously looking at a population that has gone through some level of trauma and adversity, and, on the whole, sport appears to be a good thing. A colleague of mine and I did a qualitative study. So, obviously less people here, but a little bit more opportunity to get into some of the nuance. And this quote is from a participant, and I think it's powerful in the contradiction. And so I asked him about how sport just essentially like intersected with his life and his development. He said, it helped me magnify my environment. When asked how, it increased my vitals, it increased my depression, it increased my selfishness, it increased my inability to deal with people. Like, it didn't take it away, it didn't make it better, it made it worse. And so, like, really powerful narrative there of, yeah, we could look at the numbers on the whole, but we have to kind of look under the hood and see what's happening to really get the whole story. So in that study, Our participants came from really high levels and really severe levels of developmental risk. And we developed three pathways essentially that sport took. One, it was just value neutral, it was a distraction. It was fine when I'm in it, and then I'm back into the real world. Two, it was a place of purpose and structure where they developed relationships, social capital, and helped them build the sense of resilience. Or three, like that quote mentioned, a place of celebrated deviance where it actually was worsening for their mental health. And so this is from that same study, but just looking at some of the factors that differentiated those outcomes. And so I'm sure, as many of you know, working in extension in 4-H, when it became a place of belonging, a place of relationships, and a place of social capital, like it had really life-changing benefits. When it became a place where you were just used and you were a means to an end for somebody else, it obviously made things work. And so, we see some powerful data and stories there. We've kind of followed up recently and said, okay, let's look at the totality of the literature, particularly in the United States, on the relationship between sport and mental health. I'm not going to go into great detail here, but a couple of wonderful PhD students of mine screened 25,000 papers and articles, and whittled it down to 30 that met the criteria that were specifically examining some sort of a link between sport and mental health in the United States. Really, really high level outcomes here. Participation in sport was consistently associated with higher levels of well-being and lower levels of ill-being. And the things that seemed to differentiate it were adult support, positive coaching behaviors, support for psychological need satisfaction, which is competence, autonomy, and relatedness or connection. And then mindfulness, cognitive reframing, and self talk were some interventions that also help produce positive outcomes. I want to dig in a little bit more into the conditions in which sport can be helpful for youth mental health. We recently completed a study that was done in partnership with the Women's Sport Foundation. We collected data from a representative sample of about 3,000 girls and their parents, and looked at a whole kind of life history of sport, extracurricular involvement, and then mental health. So kind of fancy researcher diagram here. I'll tell you what it means and what you need to know. Depression and anxiety were our outcomes that we looked at in this model. And we wanted to see independently if ego climate, which is the motivational climate of the sport context that they were in. So essentially, does the coach really prioritize winning in social comparisons or development of mastery and competence? As perceived by the individuals, their sense of autonomy or their choice and volition that they had in the environment, their connection with their teammates, and their closeness with their coach. And we can see by and large that there's some predictive value of all four, but the ego climate and autonomy were the two strongest predictors of those mental health outcomes. To show it a little bit differently and maybe a little bit more practically, if we compare girls who had never played sport, actually their depression and anxiety scores were not that much different, and statistically not different than those who were in these high ego climates. Where we saw the difference is when youth were involved in low ego climates, meaning their coach prioritized their own development, fun, a mastery goal orientation, if you will. That's where we saw the benefit. This pattern persists through all of these, where you see in low autonomy environments, actually mental health scores were worse than individuals who had never played sport. Whereas in high autonomy environments, off to the right here, that's where we see all of the benefit. And then same pattern here for coach relationships. And so really the never played sport group, same statistically as the low and medium coach closeness scores. Whereas we see if athletes felt really close in their relationship to their coach, that's where that mental health benefit comes in. And so kind of a main takeaway point here is that across all of this work, data point to the fact that sport or play in and of itself doesn't inherently support youth mental health or well-being. Rather, when it's designed to maximize autonomy, supportive peer and adult relationships, and promote a range of goals that include personal development, effort, fun, and connection, that's where we start to see a supportive environment for youth mental health and well-being. So I will pause there and thank you for tuning in, and happy to take any questions or just pass it back over to Catherine for our next phase.
Great. I think for time's sake, we're going to move on. But if folks want to share any questions in the chat, we can certainly make sure to follow up. I really appreciate that. It stood out to me as you were talking about the importance of creating communities that support mental health, and sports is an important part of that, and really the important role that the adult plays. And I think that transitions us very nicely into our next round of conversation. So I'm going to bring to this, thank you so much, Dr. Massey. I'm going to bring to the screen Dr. Allison Meyer and Dr. Ivan Estrada. Allison is the Associate Dean for Extension and Engagement at the OSU College of Health, and also serves as the lead for the Family and Community Health Program of the OSU Extension Services. And Dr. Estrada is an Assistant Professor of Practice with OSU Extension Services. And I'm so excited to have both of you here to really continue this conversation of how we can think about different ways of supporting and thinking about mental well-being. So, Allison, I'd love to start with you. In your role overseeing statewide health programming in recent years, there have been a number of efforts really focused on mental well-being. But I want to talk first about the AgriStress helpline. I understand that the helpline is geared towards farm workers, but I imagine in rural communities it has really broad impact. So can you tell us a little bit about the AgriStress helpline and how you see it impacting youth in the rural communities in Oregon?
Yeah, Catherine, sure. And thanks so much for having us today. The Our extension program has historically not necessarily worked in mental well-being, but it we as an extension service respond to the needs in our communities. And there's that element, and then there were some funding changes at the federal level where funds were being made available specifically to address some of these issues around mental health and substance use. But the AgriStress helpline for Oregon has been a labor of love brought together by a lot of people around the state. So folks are aware it's a 24/7 crisis and referral resource line that is tailored very specifically for farmers, ranchers, folks in fishing, and also in the timber industry or forestry. I'll ask one of my colleagues to put the number in the chat. It's 833-897-2474. 833-897-2474. And I always ask people to save it in their phone during events like this, because we really don't know when we'll encounter a situation where we feel like we're not quite sure what to do or how to handle things. And that number is available for just those kinds of situations. Again, it's a 24/7 crisis or a referral line. It's staffed by folks who are specialists in suicide prevention, and also who are trained and accredited in giving resource referrals on anything from finance to additional health system referrals and things like that. And we in the Extension Service, we partner closely with Oregon Health Authority and our friends at 988. The AgriStress helpline really sort of knits together some of the infrastructure in suicide prevention in the state. And what we know is you're asking about where are the youth in all of this, and we know that men over the age of 49 in rural and remote areas are at risk, at highest risk for suicide. But we also know that they are part of the fabric of a community. They are parents and uncles. And so this solution was brought forward first in partnership with the Oregon Cattlemen, the Oregon Cattlemen's Association, and has been supported by dozens at this point of industry groups, whether it's the nursery growers or the wheat growers or even our health systems together, who've really have come together to make sure that it's available. And what I would say is that it's certainly available for anyone. Youth are welcome to call. It's in 160 languages. It can be with some translation support. And again, we really hope to prevent the ripple effect of a tragic death. We know that it's not just the immediate family or those kiddos who could be affected, but entire communities really feel the effects of a tragic death. So we've been grateful to step in there, certainly with partners, and to start a conversation around mental well-being often that we hope will normalize making calls, which is a difficult behavior to prompt from a behavior change perspective. But anything we can do to undo the stigma, start a conversation, and make this resource available really matters.
Yeah, such a great resource to have in those communities. And we'll circle back more on starting those conversations and what that looks like momentarily. But Ivan, I understand that you've recently engaged with FFA around the AgriStress helpline. Can you tell us about how FFA is connecting to this work?
Yeah, FFA has just been such an incredible partner, and this just kind of shows where like varying initiatives can come together and just kind of amplify each other's like mission. So FFA's played a couple different roles. On one hand, they've approached us in wanting in expressing interest in developing a mental health curriculum that could be embedded within the traditional FFA curriculum. So there's one little mini project that's kind of blossomed from that partnership there, but its connection to agri-stress, not too long ago was the FFA statewide convention. And so Allison and I, and then another one of our team members, Casey Headley, we were up at the convention promoting this resource line and talking. And I should say we were talking, but really we were questioned by those students about what is agri-stress, what's this about. If you've never interacted with FFA students before, they're professionals. I'm not saying young professionals, they are professionals. I mean, they ask some of the most amazing questions about this helpline. What we try to do is draw connections or asking about like their connections. What do they see the helpline being a benefit to their own lines, to their own industries? A lot of them come from multi-generational families that have been in the ag industry. And so they themselves identified, oh, this would be a great resource because I have an uncle that's been in this industry that's been struggling. And so, yes, this is a crisis line, but you don't have to be in crisis to call. So just know that that's one of the ways we also want to promote this line. And you could also call on behalf of someone else too. With that being said, 2 weeks ago, I believe we had a FFA officer, statewide officers, and a video production team come together on campus, and we're shooting a commercial, a PSA, to promote the agri-stress line. So very soon we'll see an agri-stress commercial of FFA youth talking about the importance of the line. And we had prompts for them, but they were speaking from like the heart, what they know about their communities and how this affects their own communities. It was an incredible like 4 hour, 3 hour experience, and they just nailed it. They just absolutely nailed it. So that's just one of the ways in which we're kind of partnering and working together with FFA. They might be the end users of this line, and so it makes sense to kind of work with the youth who are also great advocates. I did want to give one more plug. Um, FFA does speech competitions, and a number of them chose mental health as her topic. And correct me if I'm wrong, Allison, but I'm pretty sure the mental health one placed or got first or something. Like, so they're thinking about it.
Yeah. Mhm. That's great. That's great. So powerful to hear young people really taking that leadership role in this space. But we also know that adults play a really critical role in supporting young people. We heard that in terms of the role of coaches, but it's even broader than that. So, Ivan, you've been doing a lot of work around mental health awareness training and really equipping adults with the skills they need to effectively support mental well-being. What does that work look like?
Yeah, so we have a mental health awareness training grant that's SAMHSA funded. We have 5 years of funding. We're in the last year and a half or so of this grant. And so with that, we're doing mental health first aid trainings, we're doing QPR trainings, and our primary audience for that are adults that work with youth. And I actually just talked about this yesterday. We're at a conference right now, which is why the backgrounds are blurred. But I was talking, I was on a panel talking about how, if we want to put a bigger emphasis to infuse like mental health programming, adults have to be comfortable with the topic as well. Um, and that's kind of what this grant was written towards, is giving increasing that mental health literacy, increasing the confidence in trying to provide help and support to people who might be in crisis or might be going through a challenge. And so that work spans Tillamook, Lincoln, and Benton County. We've trained hundreds of people in this curriculum. Another thing with this grant is we're promoting our county resource guides, which I'll actually drop a link to. So we've developed county behavioral health resource guides for every county in Oregon, as well as like Idaho and Washington and Alaska, which is part of a separate grant activity. And I'll actually plug that in a little bit later. But if you uh, don't know where to call, please explore these resources. What county you work in. We put a ton of work into this, so please do use it. The last part of our grant is a mental health graphic novel. And so I'll actually plug a link to that graphic novel, which has been super popular. And we've been working with the schools to push these out. We've distributed thousands of these. Um, the artwork's amazing. There's PDF and print. We do print versions as well within the Tri-County region. But if you look in the lake here, I believe you can have access to it in English and Spanish as well. So using various different approaches just to kind of raise awareness about mental health, but also equipping people with some skills to be able to intervene if something should come up.
That's great. That's great. And I shared in the last webinar that I was listening to the adolescent brain development stuff with my own kids in mind, and I'm going to definitely take the graphic novel to share with my own kids when if
That's
they're
great.
having moments of struggle. I really appreciate that. Um, Thinking about kind of this continuum of care, right? And there are moments where we're able to intervene early on. There are moments when we are not. You are both co-authors on a recent publication, How to Respond After a Suicide, a guide for extension professionals. Tell us a little bit about what the guide entails and how it can be used by extension professionals or even youth serving professionals more broadly.
Sure. I'll give you a couple of details and then turn it over to Ivan. It came up several years ago that one of our extension faculty members knew that there had been a completed youth suicide in an area, and we had the collective thought of how can we help, right? What do we do now? Knowing that there are really best practices on how we communicate, on how we respond, and also knowing that there are systems in place in the state of Oregon that are required by law. We felt a responsibility to be sure that as Extension, we could be a supportive and effective partner, right? And we're grateful that Rachel Culp, she was one of our master's students at the time, wrangled a lot of authors and put together a very comprehensive guide that would essentially raise awareness and expand our knowledge as extension faculty about how what we could do, right? How we could not meddle, but really stand shoulder to shoulder with folks as we responded appropriately.
Yeah, no, this was an incredible lift, and Rachel Colt did such an amazing job on this. Um, so just to kind of like hammer down the importance of postvention, there's this phenomenon called suicide contagion. Just for everybody's reference, there's an increased risk of subsequent suicides after the initial one occurs. And so this is that rapid response, coordinated response, deliberate response to try to like minimize any secondary and tertiary effects down the road. So extension in itself, I mean, I think one of its greatest strengths is its embeddedness and connectedness with the community. And because of that reason, it just makes so much sense for extension to have some clarity around what is our role and responsibility around postvention. So this guide, it's very I mean, I'm biased, but I think it's very accessible. It gives you some background about just some of the general risk factors, talks about what postvention is very broadly, but gets into some practical elements such as media. Like, what do you do if there's a 4-H volunteer that is affected by a suicide? What's the messaging within 4-H? What language do you use? How often do you distribute that? There all these elements are really important in trying to have an effective postvention response. We also have kind of an organizational sheet. So counties have a suicide postvention lead. So really the counties lead the charge and extension kind of is there for support. But I think one of the new things that I'm trying to take on is making sure that all of our county faculty actually know who the suicide postvention people are and who internally is our lead person within extension. Should a suicide occur, do those relationships exist? The second piece of this is one of the things I'm working on is trying to actually turn this into either a workshop or a tabletop exercise. That way we get in some like reps on like how to actually apply and utilize this. So that's one of the activities I'm hoping to really take on here is take this from being a guide to being like something that we can use to kind of practice and familiarize ourselves with our postvention response. So it's definitely worth exploring. Um, and if anybody ever has questions about like suicide postvention or any of these things, I'll drop my email, and everyone's always welcome to reach out to me.
Yeah, so important that we're having these conversations ahead of time and being prepared. And I think that's been a theme across a lot of these is that we're bringing up conversations that maybe folks don't normally have, right? And really talking about behavioral health, mental well-being, mental health. Allison, you've done work to facilitate some community conversations about behavioral health. What do those look like, and what impact have they had?
I'm glad we're going to talk about community conversations. And Will, you set us up, Dr. Massey set us up really well when he mentioned that one-on-one counseling or therapy is not going to solve all of our problems, right? That instead we have to really think about upstream and about our systems. And when we do think about the embeddedness and the connectedness of extension, the community conversations about mental health or about behavioral health, they've been titled different things in different places, really are a way of leveraging Extension's trusted voice, particularly in rural and remote places in Oregon. So, community conversations, it's not just a conversation. It's an evidence-based intervention. The original name is Community Conversations About Mental Health. And it is a four-part structured series that our faculty facilitate. And even when I say a four-part structured conversational series, that doesn't do it justice because it takes months of planning to ensure that you have the right group of folks at the table, leaders across the education system, the health system, right? And when I say health, I mean across the continuum of care, even in behavioral health, right? From prevention to treatment, recovery, harm reduction, all of that. We've had school districts involved, law enforcement, county commissioners, elected officials. Anytime you give a list, you know you're missing someone. So I apologize there. But what we've done now in 5 counties, and Ivan will talk a little more about Malheur next, is host these conversations over time. And the structure starts with inviting folks into a room, right? Feeding them. How do we ever accomplish anything, right? By speaking and working with one another, often over food, but understanding what is, right? That's the first step. What is actually happening with regard to behavioral health or mental health or overdose in our county? And how do we all make sure we have a shared pool of knowledge relating to the current situation? That helps a lot to undo some of the silos and to bring people together. From that, there's an analysis of strengths. What are we doing well? And there always are some, right? Too often in this topic, people have this sense of despair, and there are so many gaps, and there are, right? But there are also strengths on which we can build. Then the group identifies gaps, and then the group very clearly plans for action. And the goal there is to set a feasible, like doable set of steps and to have people take ownership of the outcomes. And I don't want to steal Dr. Estrada's thunder about the set of three, for example, in Malheur County. There were three priorities that emerged. One was around a 24/7 crisis intervention center. That work is ongoing. Another was around an interagency task force. We call it the Alphabet Soup Committee, where everybody's getting together once to talk about folks who are at risk rather than the same conversation happening in fits and spurts around and about. And then there was a third priority relating to youth. But I'll stop there and yeah, let the
I'll pick it
conversation
up.
keep going. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And so that transitions into that third priority, which was identified as being trying to create youth programs and youth activities locally. Um, one of so this is kind of a great example of a collaboration between our faculty that's based in Corvallis and the university with our county-based staff. So Barb Brody, Therese. So there's a whole team locally there that we're working together on this. And in trying to carry forward that priority and trying to create some action around that, one of the things that Barb pointed out is when we did this community conversations, youth voices were kind of left out, but that was done really intentionally because she knows her youth very, very well and understood that if we brought them into the room, they might not have been comfortable to share. So one of the things that we did is we connected with youth. We developed an activity where uh, I'm gonna oversimplify it, but we basically asked the question: if there was a youth program, what would that look like? What would that feel like? And more specifically, we used human-centered design. If anybody's familiar with like design principles, we use that for two reasons. One, because it leverages the end user and their experiences, what they know, what they're interested in. But the other thing is these youth were involved as chief science officers, which is part of this program that really prioritizes like using science, using different methodologies. And so it was just a good convergence of like what these youth were already doing, but and also leveraging their knowledge about other youth in the community as well. So from that, we distilled all that information and identified some activities. They were very interested in developing skills that they can put on a resume. Some of the things like they want to be CPR first aid trained. They want to get their food handlers card. They want to make sure that they can be competitive in the job market. One of the other ones was babysitting training because a lot of them take care of siblings, cousins. Some of them have jobs as babysitters. So for them, it was really important that they could develop skills. And so we used human-centered design kind of as our basis for trying to figure out what youth are interested in. Um, that program we're hoping to launch in summer, and we're working vigorously to kind of get that going. We've already interviewed a youth to be on an intern and work for us. I haven't gotten an update on that yet, but I'm like 98% sure that they're going to accept. So this is just so I think this is a great way to kind of like connect all the dots. We do things like mental health awareness trainings just so that everybody has a foundational understanding of mental health. Everybody's using the same language around mental health. Then we transition to community conversations, which is now we're bringing around these partners who have a stake in mental and behavioral health. And from that, we get priorities. And from that, we turn towards action, which was how um, now we're leveraging stuff to get youth some programs in Malheur County. So I'll just kind of
That's great.
pause there.
That's great. That's great. I love that you both started us and ended us with youth leadership in this work and so many rich examples of the role that extension can play and great resources for others to use. So thank you both for joining us today, especially from hotel rooms as you are engaged in your convening. So we really appreciate your time and I will let you both go. And I am going to invite Calliope Crane to join us on screen now. Calliope is the nurse for there. Oh, There's Calliope. Calliope is the nurse for the MESD Outdoor School and Camp Namanu, and just a real advocate for youth mental well-being with a long history as a nurse in a wide variety of roles. And Calliope, I'm thrilled to have you with us. You want to tell us a little bit about your role at MESD Outdoor School and Camp Namanu?
Sure. Hi. Thank you for having me. I'm out here in the middle of the woods, serving thousands of participants as a health and health and wellness educator is what I term I try to use for everyone. So I'm trying to change the construct of nurse because I think people think of it in all kinds of ways. So I serve all the program participants using strength-based principles and support staff leadership and respond to emotional and medical needs and teach innovative practices as I use like a real holistic approach with everyone I'm serving out here and then refer out because I'm only with people for a week. So I do a lot of community referrals.
That's great. That's great. So how in your role as a health and wellness educator, my question said nurse, but I'm changing it. How in your role do you support and focus on mental well-being, both with the kids directly, but also we've heard a lot about the role of adults with the other adults that are there with you at outdoor school and camp.
Well, when I returned to Oregon, I participated in a research study for mental, emotional, social health during camp through the Association of Camp Health. And what we discovered was 93% of the participants thought that we were providing better care because we asked them how they're doing and what do they need when they are anxious or upset or anything like that. So then I pulled that into all of us and pulled that empathetic approach of if I ask you what you need in a moment, then later when your moment comes up, I can better serve you. And so I started a student voice project through the school programs and am able to ask the students before they arrive, what do you need? Because I'm hearing from your adults, I'm hearing from your teachers, but it doesn't really tell me what you need or what you like or anything about you. And so the people I serve, another barrier that I have is I'm noticing is that I have to overcome some unconscious bias as well. And so one of the easiest ways for me to be able to serve someone when they are acute is to know something about them. Oh, you have 6 pets? Like maybe we can connect and then I can serve you. And so I tell them all the time, like, we don't have much time together. We have to build community. You know you better than I know you. So let's do this together. And I set up passive programming spaces with rocking chairs and sit spots and places to write letters or draw, or lots of posters are up about feelings, needs, different words around emotional regulation, different tools around emotional regulation, things like that to remind us as adults what we might need is a box breathing moment. Or for a student who's standing outside waiting for their cabin mate to get meds, they might look up and see one of my feelings check posters where they know that they're climbing a mountain and that this is where they are right now. And it's okay to have all these emotions at once.
That's great. That's great. Dr. Massey showed the connection between sports and mental well-being. There's a ton of research on the connection between outdoors and mental well-being. I'm wondering if you can share some examples of the impact you've seen just on being in the outdoors on young people's mental well-being.
Absolutely. It's it's been really interesting. I think we live here in Namanu at least. I call it a 3D sound machine. When you walk around, all you hear is running water. So we're surrounded by it. It's running under our buildings. It's everywhere. And then you have all these negative ions automatically. So the serotonin level is just up. Plus, you're getting more oxygen. So you have more energy. And the frogs are chirping and all these things are happening. And the biomarkers are there. So people are just alert, you know? And so I had a group of boys a few weeks ago who were hugging a tree outside my cabin. And I pulled them aside and asked them why. And they had all these theories about what was going on under the earth because now they'd finished all of their field studies. And they were like, just like the water, the air, the soil, like the animals in the trees. And they just had put it all together in this way. And they had confirmed that they don't really spend time outside. They live in an apartment building and they're not allowed to go play in the parking lot, you know? And so they just really, they wanted to know how big the place was. And I said, oh, it's 529 acres. And one of the kids was like, my uncle loves acres, and then another kid is like, what is an acre? And then they're talking about space and what they would grow here. And they have a small, they come from a small farming community, and just things like that. Or when I do have people who are in acute distress, I know where all the lemon balm is. And so I often will take them out of the cabin because they'll come running to me, but I'm like, no, we need to heal outside. And we might sit on the ground and just harvest a bunch of lemon balm and just smell it and touch it and like get grounded in those ways of just immersing themselves back to the earth, really. And things like that, I'm noticing a big difference. And I notice that they share what they learn with each other out here. And I'm not sure that they're running from physics class to English class to talk about it. But when they're out here, I know that they're saying, did you know that a rough skinned newt, da 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 da, and the other one might say, oh, wow, well, did you know about turbidity? And then they're having this whole conversation. And I think it's because they're alert. They're getting so much oxygen out here, and I think they're sleeping better after they get over their anxiety. But then they're just really, really aware. Like it's not just the same old, same old. Something's happening, and at all times for them. And so you'll see them looking up, and suddenly there's a bird flying, or they're looking around, or they're laying and they're rolling around in the mud and just getting all into it. And a lot of times those are the people who live in concrete, so.
Yeah, you've talked a lot about kind of setting up both the natural environment, but also the physical environment, the signs, the posters. And you've talked about the work you do one-on-one with kids. I'm wondering, what are your conversations like with the other staff members at camp and outdoor school? How do you talk with them about mental well-being?
We have a lot of self checks with staff meetings and also with each other around how are we taking care of ourselves. I ask everyone who comes to site every Sunday, can you take care of yourself? Can you take care of each other? Can you take care of this place? And so with staff, I'm bringing them a lot of lit. I read The Awakened Brain. And so then I was like, okay, here, read everything, and then the anxious generation, I'm like, this is what we're working with, to try to help with mini, I wouldn't say professional development because it's not like a workshop, but I try to give them some interventions and some ideas. And when I am working with a student, I often pull the staff in with me because of the relationship, because the students are out there with the staff all day. Then when they come to me, like I want the staff to know what we're talking about or what my process is, whether it's a progressive relaxation or a somatic responder or just drinking some tea or letting them cry or helping them draw or helping them write a letter. Like I want the staff to see so that there is this like learn by example approach, but also so they can use it, especially if it's a Monday, so they can use it again on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Because really, that's where the relationship is. I kind of, when they come to me, it's kind of breaking the chain because the community is building entirety out there, So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm thinking, Calliope, this is not on our agenda, so be prepared. I'm thinking that it's May, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. We should all be taking care of our own mental health and well-being. And you happen to mention my favorite mindfulness activity, which is box breathing. Could I talk you into leading our audience in box breathing before we close out for the day?
happily, sure. So wherever you are, just do a little wiggle, just kind of spend an hour, So with box breathing, when I'll draw a finger. So when I inhale, I'll go up. We're gonna hold our breath and really hold it. And then when I go across, we'll exhale and then we'll inhale again and then exhale again. If you want to take it a step further, you can think about what you want to hold on to when you're inhaling, and you can think of what you want to release as you exhale. But really take that moment to hold your breath in between. Okay, we'll get started.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. What a great way to end our time together. Grateful for you joining us, Calliope, and being willing to do that with us. And I hope that left everyone in a good place for the remainder of your day. Just a reminder that we have the fifth webinar in our series coming up on June 4th at the same time. We'll be focusing on trauma-informed practices, and then we'll close out on June 18th with a focus on college and career readiness. Thank you to Dr. Massey, Dr. Myers, Dr. Estrada, and Nurse Crane for joining us today, and I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.